I can hear you. Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Lovely. Uh, Excellent. Thank you. So first off, I'd just like to say thank you to Madeline for all her efforts and to her team over the past 6 months. This has been, a lot of time and effort on her part and ours to make sure we're following all her recommendations and guidelines as we submitted the application. So much appreciation to her, and this extended last year as well as we added a new dock. So the town's been very helpful, and has made this as smooth and easy as possible for us. So thank you. As a background, my family's enjoyed Harp Lake for almost 50 years. My parents own the neighboring property at 45 McLean Drive, and owning a piece of Muskoka has always been a dream that I've been lucky enough to kind of achieve in 2021. And well, the existing structure is perfect for my wife and I today. We are planning ahead, trying to do this expansion to support what we hope will be a growing family. Having a winterized property was always a number one priority for me and my wife when we purchased, but location trumped that when the property came up 2 years ago. But having it winterized and fixing the foundation was what started this project. And then as we kind of wanted to plan ahead, realized that we needed to add some space. As we've gone through this process, we've taken every recommendation and guidance from Madeline and her team. As she outlined, we've, through our thoughtful planning in order to not impede on the shoreline buffer, we actually moved back the expansion to not encroach on the shoreline buffer 15 meters. We measured from surveyor sticks that border 41 and 45 across to make sure we weren't encroaching with the east side property line. And so just again, thoughtful on our side to make sure we're following all guidance. The Fish Shoreline Health Habitat Assessment, we will follow all their recommendations as well. So, I'll leave it there. I really appreciate the town's review and diligence through this, and requesting the approval just so we can make this more of a year-round home that we can enjoy with our friends and family who are in the area.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And did you want to add, or would you like to add anything? Sure. Oops, it was on. We already prepared.
I'd just like to say I'm Philip Cheatham, his father. We have the cottage next door, and I must say I will benefit too from this.
Yes, of course you will.
Which I hope you will approve. And thank you, Madeline.
Thank you very much. And if you could turn your microphone off, that would be brilliant. With that, I would ask if there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this application either here or online.
Chair.
I'm not seeing anybody here.
Chair Alcock, I see no hands raised.
No hands and no hands. All right, with that, I will ask members of council. Yes, Deputy Mayor Armour.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks, Madeline, and thanks for the report. Just a quick question. So I'm assuming currently it's a seasonal cottage. Is the plan to make it year-round?
Yes, it is. That's the whole purpose of this, and to put insulation and heating in.
Okay, Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Your Worship. And this is more of a comment, but I think this is a really excellent example of how our residents work with our planning department and to come to a really great conclusion. And the fact that this property has a non-complying house on it, they're still able to work within the parameters that's been set forward by our official plan. And I think, Madeline, I have to thank you for your photographs that you take and the presentation. So well done. But yeah, thank you.
There were a lot of them.
There were a lot of them.
Which is a good thing. It's a good thing, absolutely. Are there any other questions, comments? I have one quick one, Madeline, and that the requirement of the conditions around the type 2 fish habitat, will those be written into the CPP permit?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. It will be. It'll be conditions outlined within the CPP permit, and those are the recommendations that were essentially contained within the fish habitat assessment. So it will reference that document as well as some of the main points, but yeah.
That's excellent. Okay, that's great. Thanks. I'm still learning about our CPP and how it works. So You're going to get a lot of those weird questions, but there you go. All right, I am not seeing any other comments, questions, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that carried. And so is Councillor Schumacher, so that was unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so next item, Kelsey is up, and that is application number Z03 2023 HT Mueller, 115 Hunts Road. And I do have a motion that has moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Schumacher. Be it resolved that Planning Council deny zoning bylaw amendment Z03 2023 HTE. With that, over to you, Kelsey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 115 Hunts Road. The property is zoned conservation and natural resource and is designated rural under the official plan. The property is also within the conservation and flood zone precincts within the community planning permit bylaw. The applicant proposes to construct a single detached dwelling on the subject lands. The zoning amendment would change the zoning on the lands from conservation to shoreline residential 2 zone, which would permit the construction of a single detached dwelling on a lot not fronting on a private right-of-way. There is a right-of-way for deeded access to the property and Pallet Lake. There was a rezoning in 2003, which changed the zoning from rural 1 to open space with exception 1501. The exception only permitted a private park with no buildings or structures. This zoning was completed as a part of a request to validate the title of the lots, as the lots were not created through a consent or plan of subdivision. Therefore, development was not permitted. The previous open space exception zone was changed to conservation in the 2008 zoning bylaw. To permit the development, the applicant has requested to change the zoning from conservation to shoreline residential 2. However, the lot does not have frontage on any watercourse, navigable watercourse, or year-round municipally maintained road. Shoreline residential zoning is intended for shoreline lots to permit development consisting of single detached dwellings and accessory buildings and structures located on individual lots in a linear fashion along the shoreline. Therefore, the subject property is not consistent with the other properties classified as shoreline residential. A zoning bylaw amendment was in process when the CPP bylaw came into effect. And that allows transitional rules, so we were able to deal with this still through rezoning, and then if there was any approval, such as a site-specific exemption, that would be added into our bylaw, our CPP bylaw. But having regard for the CPP bylaw provisions, staff would not recommend approval because the subject property is not considered waterfront residential as stated earlier. Looking at the official plan policies requiring all new development in the rural area with the exception of recreational uses such as a hunt camp to directly front upon or be accessible from a year-round publicly maintained road. Further, rural residential development should be encouraged to be located in areas where there is existing rural residential development fronting on a year-round maintained road. Access is readily available to community facilities and schools, such as schools. Demand on public services such as fire, police, and home care can be optimized. Rural residential development should not be located in remote, undeveloped areas. These policies are intended to restrict permanent rural residential development in areas where services are not readily available and access to emergency services and healthcare are limited. In this instant, the subject lands are approximately 700 meters from the nearest portion of the year-round maintained road, which is North Wasiosa Lake Road. Let's go back to this. This just shows the natural constraints on the property. There are also steep slopes and wetlands on the property. To address this, the applicant provided a scoped environmental impact study from Frycorp, dated September 2022. The scoped EIS identified eco sites and the proposed development envelopes, which are shown in the left-hand image, which delineated buffers from the wetland and any of the steep slope areas. Based on the presence of these natural heritage features, the report offered recommendations for development and mitigation measures for the future single detached dwelling. It should also be noted that there is an aggregate operation in proximity to the site. The official plan states that where new sensitive land uses, like a house, are proposed within 300 meters of a pit operation or 500 meters of a quarry operation, a technical report should be provided to ensure there's no adverse effects. A technical report was not provided as a part of the application for this new sensitive land use. And I will note that the picture on the right is not on the property, it just shows the abutting wetland. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the CPP bylaw, the zoning bylaw, and the rules of the Planning Act. District staff reviewed the application and provided comment. District staff did not recommend approval of the application. Their staff noted that the district OP requires appropriate road access to address public and municipal interests, including emergency access and long-term road maintenance. It was also circulated to the Lake Wasiosa Association because we often circulate these other lakes in proximity, and I haven't heard back from them as of yet, but planning also received 4 letters of support from abutting landowners. It is worth noting that a recent Huntsville decision to approve a rezoning application to permit development within the rural area without frontage on a year-round maintained road was considered at the hearing of the Ontario Land Tribunal. This hearing was in response to a third-party appeal of an approval done by previous council. The tribunal decided to go in favor of the appellants, the third-party appellants, and ordered repeal of the zoning bylaw passed by council because it was found that the proposed development was inconsistent with the town's official plan, district official plan, and provincial policy statement. Through staff review and analysis, this application would also appear not to conform with the intent of the official plan, zoning bylaw, and PPS, and therefore staff are recommending denial. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. At this point, I would ask if the applicant or the applicant's representative would like to speak to this application. And welcome, Mr. Simpson.
There you go.
Oh, my goodness. Thank you.
Quickly, you've forgotten, Wayne.
Yeah. Well,
you used to be familiar
I
with that.
am getting old, much older than Her Worship. I appreciate Kelsey's report in terms of what she's been able to cover in the description of the property this morning. And with me today are my clients Lynn and Werner Mueller, a neighbor, a friend who may speak, and Rob Green, who's a young planner with Tulloch Engineering. Every planner I mention from the committee is always a young planner. I think something about me, I guess. But appreciate that. Rob handled the application actually. So we're obviously, and my clients are, disappointed, of course, with the recommendation of denial. That's a given. And when we look at the staff report and we look at the sketch that was showing the zoning on the property, and then the photographs that were attached from staff, it's quite clear that the property is in large part a wooded forested landscape, a mixed forest. And the property is really quite conducive to the construction of a dwelling on it, seasonal dwelling, year-round dwelling, or whatever it might be. And indeed, my clients have had queries about the property from other people over the years because, it does have those qualities. It looks really quite attractive. And the Lynn Mueller's family, the Hunts, aptly named, the road aptly named after them, have owned the property for in excess of 5 decades. The subject lot was created back in 1971, prior to the new plan of subdivision provisions under the Planning Act in those days. And at that time, The lot as it is today was configured and shown on a reference plan. The property is together with a right-of-way over Hunt Road, the private roadway, right out to North Wasiosa Road. And also, it is together with a right-of-way to Pallet Lake. And Kelsey correctly identified that. And I think that's important to note because one of the tests we look at when we're looking at whether a property is in the waterfront area, whether it should be zoned shoreline residential or rural or whatever it might be, you have to look at the physical and functional relationship between the property and the water body. And in this case, you know, as much as the property, I think, is certainly greater than 500 feet away from the lake, 150 meters, it does have a functional relationship to it by way of the right to use. And so these lots were created, what we would now describe as back lots, were created at the time, recognizing that they shouldn't be as small as the ones along the waterfront, but they should be more rural in character and that they should have some connection to the waterfront. I think an important thing to speak to is that the applicants attended a pre-consultation meeting with the town on October 1st, 2021. Both, I'll call them Lynn and Werner, getting to know them, were in attendance at this Zoom meeting. It was during COVID. Lanny Dennis, who you all know quite well, was handling the file on behalf of Wayne Simpson Associates. I didn't get to say I'm with Tulloch Engineering now, by the way, but I'll just throw that in. But the Wayne Simpson Associates at the time, and in attendance from the town side, the district wouldn't have been in attendance because there's no district issues in terms of sewer, water, those sorts of things. But there was a planner, we believe it was Adam Ager, who was a senior planner with the municipality at the time, and a female staff member, could have been Julie Wolf, or, you know, we're not sure who it was at the time as well. But basically, there was a pre-consultation meeting held on October 1st, and that pre-consultation meeting was prompted by some direction given to the Muellers by a real estate agent who was posed with the question, is this property developable? And they said, well, you should talk to a planner, and then referred them to Lanny, and Lanny said, well, we really need to do a pre-consultation to see whether or not this will get out of the starting gate. And so the pre-consultation was held. And in essence, the senior planner, who again believed it was Adam, stated his professional support for the application on the proviso that there be an environmental impact study done to demonstrate that the lot would be usable for the intended purpose. What really would trigger that especially is when we look at the zoning map. I mean, the zoning map showed the whole of the property being conservation. But when you look at the property in the field, you know, you understand that it's not all swamp. And in the wetland picture that Kelsey showed again was on the adjacent property, but there is a wetland feature in the northeast corner. That's part of the Jessup Creek drainage area, and there are some steep slopes at the northwest corner of the property. But in large part, the property is a mixed forest, upland area. And so, and Mr. Ager didn't provide any cautionary comments other than acknowledging, as we always expect, and we advise our clients as well, that that if staff support an application, acknowledge their support of the application, which he did in this case, on that proviso, that the decision on the application finally rests with council at the council's discretion. So nobody can go to the planner and say, what do you think? And you said it was doable and all those other good things. And so that was the essence of the meeting. There was no pre-consultation summary provided by staff following the meeting, but immediately after the meeting, and I looked at through our files at Wayne Simpson Associates, there were email exchanges between the Muellers and Lanny Dennis, sort of recapping what was said, and both parties heard, that it was positively received and they were encouraged, and that there would be need for an EIS. And now this was in October of the year, and so to get an opportunity for somebody to do the field work really meant delaying the EIS until the next year, into the spring and summer of the next year. So with that in mind, our clients set out to get the EIS done in support of an application, and the EIS was filed in September of 2022. And as Kelsey mentioned, there were some recommendations, but basically the planner, the biologist recognized that certainly it would be doable to build a seasonal dwelling or a house on the property in the mixed forest area, and you know, if there are any measures to be implemented through the zoning or through site plan approval, you know, such as a 30-meter buffer from the wetland feature, then that would all be part of the zoning, or maybe part of the CPP permit, you know, as it is, might be now. So, so there were no other additional technical studies that were cited in the pre-consultation as being necessary, including any reference to any noise and vibration study that might be associated with the pit quarry operation, which is between 300 and 500 meters away to the east of the subject property, and certainly, you know, that in a greater distance when we look at where the building would be built on this particular property. One of the application, I mentioned the application was filed in January of this year, before the CP bylaw came into effect. One thing we were disappointed with in terms of this, in terms of the report, there was no discussion or mention of the pre-consultation meeting, because it turned out to be, you know, a very critical thing, because my clients and Lanny, who's a professional planner for more than 30 years, took the guidance from the staff at the time, a senior staff member, to you know, decide the course of action and to proceed from there. And you know, my comment would be, if only for a matter of fairness, the application should be considered with that in mind, that the direction was provided. One of the things we've acknowledged that the property, I believe Kelsey said it's about 700 meters of roadway between, you know, from one end of Hunt Road, the private road, out to North Wasiosa Road. And we know that there are, Rob counted up, there are 14 cottages on the waterfront, and there are 6 equivalent of rural residential backlots along that same stretch of roadway. So there are 20 people, individual properties that currently use that roadway. It is a private roadway, and each of those people, parties, the lands are pertinent to have rights of way are pertinent to them. But the roadway is maintained privately, collectively by those owners on a year-round basis. You know, the road is routinely plowed as soon as the first snow falls, and is maintained through the winter. One of the persons who lives in the area is actually beyond where this house would be, and you know, I think they're the one with the snow plow. I might be corrected, but anyway, you know, certainly the road gets maintained beyond that point, and everybody in the neighborhood would recognize that the level of service provided in a rural area is going to be something less than what would be expected in terms of response time for fire trucks, and the dependency on people maintaining the road and making it available to somebody. Again, I think it's important to recognize, as much as we were asking for shoreline residential zoning on the property, again, the property does physically and functionally relate to the lake. We note that the property immediately to the south of the subject property, which again is separated from the lake and the other cottage properties by Hunt Road, it's already zoned shoreline residential. So, and it's immediately adjacent. So I think, you know, what we would like to say is that, you know, if we consider the pre-consultation meeting and what came out of that, and I know my clients and Lanny heard the same thing, and Adam Ager expressed his professional opinion that the application, as a professional planner, he would support it, provided the EIS was done, is an important consideration, and maybe an inflection point of this whole application. Staff, you know, my clients are, you know, again, they've owned the property for 50 years. You know, it's all been part of the family, and they would like to put it to some use for themselves or for grandchildren or somebody in the future, but it does need to be rezoned. Conservation zoning is entirely inappropriate, and nobody would build a hunt camp on that kind of acreage. So what we'd like to ask is for the planning council to to amend the resolution of denial to approval. And we would offer up that if it makes the difference between denial and conditional approval, we would accept the recommendation of staff that there be a holding designation attached to the zoning until such time as the noise and vibration study is completed to the satisfaction of the town. That was a matter that was raised, sort of more lately in the matter, and Rob, identified that as a possible concern as well in his report. So we accept that, even though it wasn't mentioned in the pre-consultation, but, I think it's a reasonable thing to ask if it makes the difference between approval or denial. And if Her Worship would permit, I think Lynn Werner would like to say a few things at this time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. Lynn, welcome.
Is it still on? Yes. Hi. First off, I'd like to thank you for letting me say something. There are other people here also from the area?
And Lynn, we will ask them when,
okay.
That's our next step.
Okay.
But
okay.
right now, it's your opportunity.
Okay.
So-
And to a couple of the issues that, I forget your name. Kelsey put on, the one pond picture, which is beautiful, is what you would look down on from our property. It's easily accessible, it's a perfect building area, but I acquired this property knowing that it was zone conservation because that became a problem when my grandfather died. It couldn't be transferred into another name because of whatever. And at that time, my father was just going to let it go for back taxes. He said, what's the point of having land you can't put a park bench on? But I've loved that land. At the time, the road allowance was up to it, but it wasn't open. And the property was not accessible except by foot through the bush, which I remember doing when I was young and seeing the beautiful pond as it was back then, as opposed to the wetlands that it is now. My thoughts had always been to just keep the lot perhaps someday to be used by a grandchild or a great-grandchild, as it came from my great-grandfather. This all started when I was approached to ask if I would consider selling it to someone looking for property for her son to build on. I explained to her that it was zone conservation and couldn't build on, but I would check with the realtor what it might be worth. And the realtor suggested I contact Lanny Dennis. She said she could not give me any kind of idea as to what it would be worth otherwise. Lanny was not sure that it would go through, and he said that we should do this pre-planning consultation with the town to ascertain whether it would be worth pursuing. We were told we would only be out $255 plus his time, and would find out if it was worth even trying to rezone. This money, he said, would then go towards the rezoning application. This made a lot of sense, and the meeting was set up via Zoom October 1st, 2021. The meeting seemed to be pretty positive. Of course, no direct assurances were made to suggest that it was for sure would be approved. However, no direct comments were made to suggest that it would not be possible other than the environmental issues. And I am a very conservative person. If there had been any inkling that it might not go, I would have said fine and backed off. The planner noted that perhaps the property might end up with several different zoning areas. For example, one area you could build on, and in another area you could not. He said we would have to do the environmental assessment study on it to ascertain what might be possible. He told us if we did the assessment and it proved viable, that they would support it, but it was not a given that the application would go through. Lanny also felt the meeting was pretty positive and got the ball rolling for the environmental assessment, probably within 2 weeks of that meeting. Being fall, this could not be done until the following spring. This assessment alone cost over $3,000 and showed us that indeed there is an area that would be good to build on. It is probably the highest spot in the whole area, well above the pond, and indeed above the level of all the homes in the area. Now we were abruptly told that the planning committee would not support or ever have supported the application because it's not on the lake, even though it has deeded access to it, and it's on a private road that is used and well-maintained year-round by more than 20 properties. As your picture showed with the posting on it, that was at the worst time of year now, as things are melting, and you can see it's well-used, it's well-plowed, it's a really good road. Suddenly, the quarry was an issue, although it was never mentioned in 2021. The town had no record of the pre-planning meeting and no notes as to what happened there. The town would require us to pay for a study of the quarry. I think anybody buying it would see the quarry's there. Anybody living there knows the quarry's there. I know the reason for a zoning application is for you to study the merits of whether or not rezoning should occur. Rightly so. Environmentally sensitive areas need to be protected. The town has to have building lots that are viable and properly accessed. Having a pre-planning consultation meeting is also a great thing to avoid situations like we have found ourselves in. It should have indicated to us that we should not pursue the rezoning. We would have been out $255 plus very limited consultant fees, and we would have gone back to knowing that we had this worthless but beautiful piece of property, and we would have been content. Your consultant had, I think, 3 letters with no objections to it, and there's actually more, and Carl Hunt, who owns behind us, sent an email yesterday morning. He's in Alberta, was a fisheries conservation person. He has absolutely no objections to it. However, what really, really bothers me is the way it's been done. Whoops, no records, so sorry. It would never have been allowed, and we trust you were told that by your consultant or the planner. If you would like to withdraw your application, we might consider refunding some of those fees. There's no point in withdrawing the application. We are now in over $10,000, and I can well imagine it will end up closer to $15,000 or more before today is all said and done. That's a very large amount of money for us, and we are not in the same tax bracket as many who build mega cottages or do land developments in Muskoka, and who you perhaps deal with more regularly. The person who is first interested in purchasing the land is also not a big developer or a rich person. More than anything from today, whether you accept or decline this application, I would like you to please, please look at your system. Look at how it is set up and make sure records are kept of meetings so that you can be accountable should your staffing change and that something like this does not ever happen to someone else. This was a Zoom meeting as it was during COVID. I think it could easily have been recorded. There were 2 people from your staff there, the planner and a woman. And I don't know if she's an assistant planner, a planning technician, or a secretary. She was introduced, but I do not recall her status. If you decide to decline this application on whatever grounds you deem and can justify as necessary, so be it. That's your job. I accept that. I think it is also your job to make sure that something like this does not happen to another citizen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ms. Mueller. And they are absolutely noted and very much appreciated. I will, certainly on my behalf, I would apologize for you going through all of that. I will also say that, and it's not an excuse, it just is a fact, that COVID presented many things to all of us. And, you know, clearly in this case, we lost a member of staff, I think probably 2 that attended that meeting. And that is a bit of a, you know, things happen. Why there wouldn't be records, I don't know. But clearly, if I have every confidence our current staff are very, very, very competent and would ensure that we would always have records. So I take your comments to heart, because it's not something you like to hear that anybody went through that. And I appreciate the fact that there's an emotional attachment with this as well. So all I can say is it's noted for sure. And again, I am sure you'll hear from others after.
Yeah, and
Okay.
your current planner's main arguments from the brief email he sent me was that it wasn't on a year-round maintained road. It is. And it's not on lake access, but it has deeded access.
And so one last comment is to, our planning staff are often in the position, well, always in the position, that their response to any file that's before them, they have to ensure that it complies with the plans that we have adopted. And so even if they thought, I don't have a problem with this makes sense from any level, if our policy says we don't allow it, they are required to recommend denial based on that policy before us. But that is actually the beauty of the system that we have. This being, we are allowed to veer off course if we feel that, another decision might be more appropriate. And that's why staff always provide us with, and Kelsey referred to this, with the option, should committee decide to go another direction, this is what I would recommend. So just so you know, that we try and staff do, they actually have to, by law, recommend if policy says X, Y, and Z. It's not, they don't have that authority. If they did, I think we'd be in a real mess, actually. It would be good. So, thank you. And at this point, I will ask if there are members of the public who would like to speak to this application. Yes, sir, please. If you could come forward, that would be great. And I would also check electronically as well, if there is someone.
Members of the public who are present electronically, please raise the hand button or press 9 to indicate that you would like to address council.
Okay, we're going to start here. We have someone, so, well, that's great. Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you please state your name and,
My name is Bill Summers.
okay,
I live at 70 Hunts Road. Up until 1998, the road basically stopped at my driveway for winter maintenance. It was open in the summer, but not in the winter. I have been the secretary treasurer of that road. I don't know, goes back to the 60s. Anyway, beside that, I just did a little history. I have sent in a consent that I agree that this should be approved, this motion, and I think each one of you may have it. I hope you do. I want to reiterate that the past councils, now that goes back a ways, have allowed 5 properties to develop on back lots in this area. That was mostly prior to these 4 back lots being zoned open space. The latest one, which was probably 2021-22, just went on the market recently for 1.8 million, and it is not waterfront. And it sold within a week, I understand. So the road access basically ends at property 115 and 121, I think it is. And then there's a right-of-way across 121, which then allows other properties to be accessed. During the summer months, the garbage collection turns around at the southeast corner of 115. So the municipality is picking up the garbage at that location. the water that you see in the Jessup's pond comes from Pallet Lake, comes from Lake Wasiosa, it comes from Jessup Lake, it comes from one other one, and Ripple Lake. So it's all local water which is traveling through, and the pond is created based on Green's haulage damming the waterway. And that was done years ago. There's 2 major culverts in there at that dam, but it brings the water back. So there's a fair pond when you think about it. And it's right up on the northeast corner of their 115 property. So, if you have any questions, I'll
Well, thank you for coming forward, and I'm going to ask if there are other members of the public who would like to speak, and if you could stay in the gallery in case someone has a question for you. That'd be great. Are there any members of electronically, Manuel? No?
Chair Alcott.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Andrew Nichols, and I and my wife are residents at 121, arguably the furthest point down Hunts Road. And I would just like to add a little bit of additional color as to the quality of the upkeep of the road through the winter months. It's already been noted by Bill that there is existing municipal services provided through the summer months in the way of garbage collection and recycling. But through the winter, it's important to note that the services that we have contracted to keep the road clear are provided by not a plow per se, but a snow throwing machine.
Right.
And a snow throwing machine affords you greater opportunity to create maximum width on the road. So really, if there are, concerns with regards to, access, I would argue we are at the end of the road. Ours is a all-season dwelling. While we are seasonal guests in Huntsville, I know that there are a lot of other permanent residences that they enjoy their buildings 365 days a year, and neither the road in summer nor winter has ever been an inconvenience for any of our use, nor for those that are permanent residences. So I think that it's also through that lens that I think that while still a privately maintained road, we have collectively, with Bill's support, done our best to make that road as close to a wonderful municipal road as possible, even though we're the ones that are caretakers for it.
Perfect.
So that would be my only additional comment.
Thank you very much for that. Did you sign the little piece of paper there? That would be brilliant. All right. And finally, are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to this? Seeing none, I will ask committee. Yes, all right. Now I have to remember who's going first. I think, all right, it is Councillor Cloutier, number 1.
Through you, Your Honor, thank you. Just to let everybody, I've been down that road with my business, with my huge, large crane, quite a bit over the past few years because of the development down there. Never had a problem. I've been down there in the middle of the winter. I've been down there in the summertime. The road is very well maintained. Even in the winter, it's as wide as it is in the summertime. Never any potholes. It's very safe road to go down. Trees are trimmed. It's very well maintained. The only question I have in all this is the quarry study. That's a big ticker. It's close. I've been at the quarry before, looking over actually at that side, and it does seem closer than what you actually think. I don't know what the life of the quarry is, or how long it's going to be there, or how much drilling and blasting that they can do in a year that affects the local community there. But I'd be in favor of this, but I would like to see the quarry study done before this is recommended. But as far as the in and out for the road part, I don't have a problem in there. I've been in there.
Thank you for that. And who was, I think, Councillor Renwick? Or was it Councillor Clark? Councillor Clark. All right, Councillor Renwick is being very generous. There we go. Councillor
you.
Clark.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock, and thank you, Councillor Renwick. So I have to agree with the comments made by the property owner's planner and the comment letters received from neighbors in support of the application and Ms. Mueller's comments. I took a drive down the private road yesterday, and it's maintained to a very good standard. Actually, I think better shape than North Wasiosa Lake Road, to be quite honest with you. There are currently many properties developed on the road, including waterfront cottages, homes, and residences that aren't on the water. So I believe there's a precedent that's been set already to approve the application. Our planning department recommended to deny the application because it doesn't comply with the official plan. However, I believe this is a case where the property falls between the cracks of the official plan. I believe this application should be considered for approval to allow the property owners to develop and use the property for its highest and best use. I don't support the motion to deny the application. I would be in support of a motion to allow the application to be approved, providing that the concerns regarding the conservation area and the quarry are dealt with moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. And I will ask Councillor Renwick, followed by Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I believe Councillor Clark has just taken the words right out of my mouth. I also would agree that this application, it does fall between the cracks in our official plan, and our building, our planners have to deny it. My question is, within the scope of the zoning of this property, it is conservation right now, so where would we sit, Kelsey, with actually changing the zoning if it's not going to be considered residential waterfront?
Yes, thank you through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question. So the conservation, from my understanding, was put in place because these lots weren't rightfully created through a Planning Act process. So because that wasn't followed through, it went through that rezoning in 2003 that essentially prevented any development because it didn't go through the appropriate channels. What those are, we could speculate, but I think it was based on willing and deeding the properties. So going to a shoreline waterfront property, it's not necessarily appropriate, and I just wanted to clarify, so it's not that it's not on a maintained road, it's not on a municipally maintained road. So, and also we understand that they have deeded access, but they don't have direct frontage on a water body. So where for seasonal residents, that means another access point should there be an emergency, whereas in this location, the only way for emergency services to access this lot is the private road. And I am understanding that it's well maintained and beautiful right now, but I think our official plan is looking at, well, what's the downfalls should these private property owners not maintain it to this level. So that's why we didn't deem it appropriate to be shoreline residential. If you look at our other provisions such as waterfront backlot and like a rural property, it would be too small for a woodland retreat, which would require 4 hectares. And then also it would be too small for a waterfront backlot, which also requires 4 hectares. So we saw that it wasn't really appropriate in either of those designations. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. I kind of got rambly. Thank you.
Thank you, it does. Just a follow-up then, so are we then, how do you zone it then? Like what can we zone it if we wanted it to continue as a, to be developed?
Thank you for the question, through you, Madam Chair. Typically, we've done in the past where it's zoned perhaps waterfront backlot with an exception for the deficient size, or rural residential with the exception for it not to be on a waterfront, on a year-round municipally maintained road. And then there's also a provision for an agreement to be in place. It's also worth noting that yes, there has been development, but I think our official plan is trying to mitigate those lands that are on non-maintained roads, because as more people are a part of those back lots, they want services, they want it maintained. And I'm not saying that directly these people speaking today want that, but in the future. So that's what our official plan aims to do. But as noted, there wasn't a an LPAT, or sorry, they've gone through many names, an OLT decision that did find that that was not consistent with the PPS and official plan, but that has been the way that previous councils have gone. And there was also a comment from fire and building that it would either have to be adequately sprinklered because emergency services couldn't necessarily reach this property, or other fire mitigation measures deemed appropriate by the chief building officer and the fire department. So that if you're going one way, that's something also worth considering.
If you'll forgive me, Councillor Fitzgerald, no, you won't, but I just, because it's related to what your question, Councillor Renwick, and Kelsey, your response. This is very much a situation of where I live. I live on a private road. It's a condominium road. And the requirement at the time, it was a plan of subdivision for every new builder to have a sprinklered system. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been approved. So that I would have said, if this were to turn around, I don't know how it's done, but, there'd be a condition to meet the safety requirements. Just as you said, the Public Works have very strong views about that. And so that could be an additional condition. And I understand, I think the zoning, I should know this right off the top of my head, is rural residential, even though we have shared common property on the waterfront. So we have deeded access, but I think it's rural residential. Yes. So I know Kelsey's going to come back and say, I'm all wrong. There we go.
No, you're perfectly correct. Thank you. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify that the applicant did ask for shoreline residential too, so I would also defer to them because that's what they also requested. But in previous examples, it was rural residential or rural with an exception, rural residential with exception.
Right. So as to the appropriate designation, I think that would be incumbent upon you. Councillor Fitzgerald. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Worship, and I appreciate all the comments made so far, and thanks for the amazing report. Very thorough and all the information that's required. And I like the fact that we can discuss this and you come and you support our OP, which we all passed, and our new CPP. It seems to me that we're missing one little thing, and I don't know if there's garbage and services being picked up at the corner at 115 or 121 already. It seems like there are services there. I don't know the length of Councillor Cloutier's crane, but I think that when services say they can't get down there because it's a non-maintained municipal road, they will always endeavor to get down there. I think sometimes we say no because we can say no. And we forget the common sense that if a crane can go down there, a fire truck can go down there, an ambulance can go down there, an OVP cruiser. I don't like the sense of precedence, because I don't believe that any application comes with precedence in mind. Each application is looked at its own merits. And I think this warrants development. If we think that we need to provide services down there, well, there's another tax base being added to that area that may require services, but apparently they're already getting it. There's one further thing, but it has escaped me.
That's because I took so long getting to you.
But I do, I know what it was. We do have other instances in our new precincts where we have SR2, where there's absolutely no water within a kilometer.
Right.
Old Muskoka Road would be an example. So as far as what we call it, I think is probably irrelevant, but I would definitely support this.
Okay, thank you for that. Just as a quick additional comment on the services, it's interesting, things change, right? As we have changed with the CPP. I know, and again, I'll speak from personal experience. I'm on this private condominium road, and the district in the olden days would never have had district service waste collection on this road because it was private. But because of the change in district policy to improve our waste management and get our levels up, they now have a small truck that goes down these private roads, and it's We're all paying for that, even though it's a private road, because they feel it's far more important to collect as much waste and recycling and even compost. So times change, and I think that was an older refrain about we can't get services out there, and it's new, right? Anyway, I think, are there any other questions? Yes, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Let me get my glasses on. I made a couple of notes. First of all, the one thing I noticed here is there seems to be a real sense of community on Hunts Road, and that's something that I think we're losing in our society all across the province and the country. The fact that they seem to be working together to keep a road and a community flourishing is something to be applauded. I wonder if it's a time to revisit the OP's requirement for the 4 hectares on a backlot. I know that it's being discussed at the district level. I know that other councillors in other districts are considering this. Not everybody wants to nor can afford to develop on water. Not everybody moves up here to live in the urban core. Some people might choose to live on a piece of paradise on the top of a hill overlooking a pond. This is an easily developable piece of land, and it touches Hunts Road. And if it actually touched water, we would allow the permit in a second. So I'm wondering if maybe that's a bigger discussion to be had, but I definitely think that that's something to discuss. So if we do go forward, I'd love to give these folks something that can't be easily appealed at the tribunal. So I wonder if we look at, instead of SR, and I'll rely on Mr. Simpson and Kelsey and the planning professionals, not my forte, but if it's less likely to be appealed if we went for rural residential with an exception, and then we also have discussions going forward about reducing the lot requirements for that. I don't anticipate that anybody in this neighborhood is going to appeal a decision, but the last thing we want to do is set these guys up for more disappointment down the road. So, and lastly, I think that's about it. I would, if we did move forward with allowing the development, I'd want to rely on our planning staff as to what should be included in holding provisions and whatnot.
Absolutely, and I would count on our planning staff to figure out the best way as wording has been suggested for an approval, and I noticed our clerk has been typing away here. But one comment, and there is a slight difference between, I believe, this application versus the one that was appealed. The one that was appealed, almost the entire neighborhood did not like the approval. There were many opponents as opposed to supporters. So as I recall, I think that's the case. So I do think while it's a comparable application, it wasn't a comparable situation. I don't want to. Do we need 2 minutes while Kelsey looks at the proposed amendment?
Sorry, I just wanted to ask clarification. So right now we have an amendment drafted up for it to be conservation to SR2, and I heard appetite for that maybe not to be the case. So I was wondering if there was further direction on that.
I'm going to look to our director because she might have an opinion. But I think, again, given the discussion, rural residential. No? Okay, that's why I'm asking. It's so great that she gives me those looks. Like, you're insane. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock. I think that if we can take 2 seconds, we'll briefly confer and figure out what the best zoning category should be.
Perfect. So we'll take more than 2 seconds? We'll take 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. Is that enough time? A bio break, so 5-minute bio break. And, Deputy Mayor Armour, did I miss you?
Thank you, Worship. I just had to join in the conversation because I hadn't said anything, but I'm listening to everybody, and it's great input. It's nice to see the discussion go around the table. And I'm a firm believer if you own a nice piece of property on a nice pond and you want to overlook it, I think you should be able to build on it. So you got my support.
And it's interesting, I think it sounds very familiar. My new house is on a pond, overlooking the pond, and I quite love it, but there you go. And I've missed Councillor Schumacher, who's had her hand up for ages, and I apologize, Dion.
Not ages, but that's okay. Yes, I concur with a lot of being said. yeah, I do want to maybe capture that piece you did say about the sprinkler system, but I appreciate, as Councillor Morrison said, the community feel that is there, the support that is for that community. I can speak from, you know, experience, and I'm sure Councillor Fitzgerald's got a lot of the same calls around private roads. And it is great to hear that there is a community that is doing it for themselves. And I mean, that is the requirement, I believe, is emergency access on a private road is up to them. So they are obligated to create that opportunity for themselves. And it sounds like they're doing an amazing job of it. And that's all I'd have to say.
Thank you, Councillor Schumacher. I'll make sure that I'm looking at, you're only a little wee box on the screen, just tiny. So I had to rely on Tanya to let me know that. Councillor
I
Schumacher.
just wanted you to see my face still without having to wear a mask.
Exactly. Well, we've heard you, and we're looking. All right, with that, a 5-minute biological break. Okay, we have the big thumbs up, which means we're back and we're live. And I hope everything's working correctly, and I see that Councillor Schumacher is back with us. So our clerk is going to put the proposed amendment on the screen. And our motion to amend. And I would ask I need a mover, and Councillor Renwick to move and Councillor Clark to second. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Renwick, seconded by Councillor Clark. Be it resolved that Planning Council approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 03-2020. Do you mind if I read it here? This because my glasses are all goofed up. Sorry, all right, so. That's good. All right, where am I? Amendment Z 03-2023 HT, changing the zoning from a conservation zone to a shoreline 2 holding zone to permit the construction of a single detached dwelling on a lot fronting onto a private right-of-way. And further that the holding provision may be removed and development may proceed upon the Director of Development Services being satisfied that the following has been completed. 1, a community planning permit agreement has been entered into with the Town of Huntsville to acknowledge that access will be on a private road and that no municipal services will be available. 2, plans are submitted to the satisfaction of the Town of Huntsville demonstrating that the dwelling will be fully sprinklered or include other appropriate fire suppression or mitigation measures. And 3, a noise and vibration study is conducted to the satisfaction of the Town of Huntsville to determine the compatibility of the proposed development and to recommend mitigation measures for a new sensitive land use within 300 meters of a licensed pit or 500 meters of a licensed quarry to the satisfaction of the town. Thank you, Tanya. All right, so, yes, Kelsey.
Apologies, through you, Your Worship. I think it should read Shoreline Residential, and it just says Shoreline 2. Yeah. Thank you.
I didn't notice that. Thank you.
No problem, thanks.
Do I have to read that Shoreline Residential? I don't think so, because Tanya's not even, she's ignoring me. So, are there questions or comments with respect to that amendment? Looking around the table. Okay, then I've read the amendment. I will call the question. All those in favor? And even Councillor Schumacher, I can see your hand. So that carries unanimously, and so I will now call the question on the main motion as amended. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. So I just want to say on this, thank you very much for your input today to the Mueller family and to all of the community who is here with us. And I forgot to mention that we have some a very important person with us today, and that is former Councillor Brian Thompson, who has joined us for this particular issue. So, hello, Councillor Thompson, and thank you for being here. But in truth, I really do appreciate the kind of input that you provided today, and to your planning consultant as well. It was a thoughtful application, and consequently, there was a thoughtful discussion around the table, and that's what can happen. And it's nice to see it. So thank you. With that, I think I need to sign something, but that was it for public. I'm closing off. All right, so we are at the end of the public meetings, and with that, now that all comments have been received, I declare these public meetings respecting the above applications to be concluded. We will now move to the non-public portion of the meeting. And the first item is, Kelsey is still with us, and that's great. I should say that if the applicant, with respect to these two applications before us, would like to make comments regarding this application, I will certainly ask them after the presentation from staff. And the first one is the CPP 2023 HT 3448848 Ontario Limited at 11 Chaffee Street. To you, Kelsey. Oh, and I have to read the motion. This is a long one. If you wouldn't mind putting this up, and I will ask council if you would mind if you'll forgive me and allow me to waive the reading of this motion, because it's a full page and it is exactly as it was in our published agenda, and it's going on the screen. But I should mention that I do have a motion that is moved by Councillor Cloutier and seconded by Deputy Mayor Armour. And this is with respect to Planning Council provisionally approved community planning permit application CPP 23 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 2.12.4C, 3.2.4C, and 4.5.4 of the Community Planning Permit Bylaw 2022-97 to, and I will not read all the rest because it's exactly as it is on the screen, which is exactly the same as our published agenda. So with that, I'm turning it over to you, Kelsey.
Thank you so much, Your Worship. Through you, the subject property is located at 11 Chaffee Street. The property is within the Central Business District precinct and is designated Central Business District within the official plan and within the urban settlement area. The application has been submitted to permit the construction of a 3-story mixed-use building with a ground floor commercial unit and 4 2-bedroom dwelling units on the floors above. A Class 3 CPP is required to reduce the rear yard setback from 7 meters to 0.9 meters, as seen here for the mixed-use building. Reduce the minimum required landscape buffers abutting the street from 3 meters to 1.6 meters. Reduce the required minimum landscape buffers not abutting the street from 1 meters to 0 meters. So here are the ones not abutting the street. And then this is the one abutting the street. And then reduce the length of the parking spots from 6 meters to 5.9 meters, and reduce the required length of the parallel motor vehicle parking spot from 6.7 meters to 5.9 meters, which is harder to show, but for those spaces shown on the plan. The CBD precinct permits commercial uses and multiple dwellings. As such, the proposed mixed-use building is a permitted use. However, planning relief is required to address the development on this constrained lot. Some of the reliefs are beyond the Type 2 variation limits. Therefore, CPP 3 is required. Multiple residential uses are permitted in a mixed-use building within the Central Business District, provided the residential units are located on the above at-grade commercial uses. In this instances, the units are on the upper floors, which allows commercial units to be on the street-oriented level. The mixed-use character also allows for a transition between the commercial area and the residential area to the east. The proposed development is on a constrained lot by its area, which is attributes to many of the needed reliefs. The rear yard setback is being reduced from 7 meters to 0.9 meters to allow room for the required parking, as well as to reflect the existing building line of the budding Sutton Realty building. The required parking also leaves little room for the required landscape buffers, abutting and not abutting the road. There is minimal vegetation on the site currently. However, there is a landscaping between the property and the lot to the south, which you could see in this drawing, or in this picture. A 1.6 meter landscape buffer is also being added abutting the road, which will improve the view from the street. It is noted that staff do have a bit of concern with the feasibility of parking spot number 9, which you could see right here. Oh, my mouse is not working. Right there. I should have left it longer for you guys to look at. Just in terms of how feasibly somebody could get in and out of that spot. So we would be open to considering cash in lieu of parking or a layout redesign to permit alternative parking consideration. The proposed increased density is the result of adding 1 additional unit. However, 3 units would be permitted at the allowable 60 units per gross hectare density, and increased by 1 unit is considered reasonable as it is within the intensification corridor and would contain residential rental units, which are much needed. The development is also within the 500 meters of an operating or identified non-operating waste disposal site, which is well known to be in Brendel Square or around that area. The D4 guideline assessment was provided for this application. The report described a geotechnical research of the subject lands, which are within the historic wetland site, which reportedly was backfilled with organic rich material, namely sawdust from the existing previous sawmill in that area. Concentrations of methane were found in the soil gases. This condition is unlikely to change, although it is recommended that any building to be completed should be completed with a engineered geotile textile slab seal and some form of passive engineered venting. The author of the report also recommended for further geotechnical investigation of the fill material and subsurface materials. However, adverse impacts are not anticipated, and recommendations are included within the conditions. The subject property is within the area known as Brendel Square. Development within this area generally is not permitted below the regulatory flood elevation. To mitigate potential flood hazards, a condition was added to ensure buildings are flood-proofed, and minimum elevations of doors, windows, and other openings are above the regulatory flood elevation. Oops. The application was circulated in accordance with the community planning permit bylaw. Civic Addressing did provide comments regarding the addressing of the future units. The fire department provided comments regarding the flooding risk, which is to be addressed at the building stage through the flood proofing. Operations did request a stormwater management plan and a photometric plan. And the district had no objections provided the recommendation of the D4 assessment were followed. Proper entrance permits were provided and servicing connections were addressed. Through staff's review and analysis, the application would appear to conform with the intent of the official plan and the community planning permit bylaw, and therefore staff are recommending approval. It should be noted that the requirement for the photometric plan requested by operations was not included in the original resolution, so there is an amendment ready for that to be added. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And I'm about to call the applicant and the applicant's representative, but they're faster than I am talking. So welcome.
There we go. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, John P. Gallagher and Associates, and with me is Edward Seagram Jr., and following along is his sister, Melanie Phillip. Edward and Melanie were in attendance when that Ryerson students put together their plans for Brendel Square and held an open house. And that there were discussions that piqued their interest in this vacant parcel that they've owned for some time in developing it. And as such, we debated the idea and didn't really want to. Then I got the go-ahead to come up with a plan. So I retained Carrie Bice and Rory to come up with a nice compact building on the site that meets the intent and tries to maximize rental units in a small footprint. In that regard, the lot itself is only about 52 by 100, a standard lot size in Huntsville. We're allowed to have a 80% coverage. This building's around 30%. The property itself, when we did our pre-con, we started out as a minor variance. And as you may or may not know, one can vary a setback through a minor variance process up to 100%. Staff asked us to switch over to the CPP. We did. However, because the staff variation only allows for a 20% variance, we've had to go through the full process, even though the lands were zoned and were previously zoned for the use. Our main purpose of the application was to get a rear yard reduction to be in line with the Sutton Realty. In the previous iteration of the bylaw, if you were to build on Chafee Street, you were allowed a 0 setback under the previous iterations, and that was similar for some of the other setbacks on the property. So we agreed to proceed through with the CPP, come up with a plan. We looked at the height, and basically the property is serviced by municipal water and sewer. There's interest in a office along the lines of health service that Edward is having discussions. With regards to the apartments, staff asked if we were looking at short-term rental, and that's not the intent. The intent is monthly apartments. Edward followed the building that I did over on Chafee, and it's going to be very similar in design, a little bit of a combination of the buildings to sort of create one. So with regards to the application, there were a number of items. Originally, when we started out, we were looking at 2 issues. One was the landscape buffer around the parking, and the other one was the rear yard setback. And by going into the CPP, we've had that extended now to 6 different exceptions, and I don't think some of them are required, and I'll explain my reasons why. And it might be something that needs to be looked at in the CPP later on, but it's a real issue, and it's the first time that I've seen it. And the first area is number 6, increase the maximum density for a multiple dwelling from 60 units per hectare to 78 units per hectare. I've never seen a commercial property have to provide density provisions for accessory residential. That's usually taken care of by the zone regulations such as coverage, parking, height. If that were the case, and we're start to measure that way now, then all the policy that was put in place on Main Street to support residential growth on 3rd floors couldn't happen because they wouldn't have the density. So I bring that out. Secondly, with regards to the number 2, it does say to reduce the minimum width of the landscaper abutting a street from 3 meters to 1.6. In this regard, because we have such a small footprint, we started at the back and we worked our way forwards trying to utilize every inch of that lot. We were left with a space in between the front lot line and the parking of 1.6. There's likely another meter or so to the sidewalk, which puts it back. Second to that, there was a reducing the width of the landscape buffer not abutting a street from 1 meter to 0. So here's where there's a conflict. The parking standards in the CPP state that when it's in a CBD, the parking can abut each other. It also goes on to state that when you had the CP in the CPP, that you are allowed to utilize the front yard for parking. And I did not see a 3-meter setback. So we tried to use up and green up the space because, you know, next door we have businesses, the Cripple Creek, they're recently upgrading theirs, but there's no landscaping, there's no property around the building. There's no parking for that. So we're trying to clean it up to give a better visual appearance from the street line. On condition or request 4, that doesn't have to be in there. I would ask you strike that out. 5.98 converts to 6 meters. When Rory did the drawings up, he submitted them, or he did them in imperial. I asked him to do it in metric, and he hit a button, and that's what it converts to. It doesn't convert to 6 for some reason. 19.68 feet is actually 5.99, which 5.98. So I think that doesn't need to be said because we meet the requirement. There was one that we, along the parallel parking, we couldn't get the extra depth. Instead of 6.7, we have 6 meters there. We don't want to redesign the parking or pay cash in lieu because we do have 4 residents there and we do have an office, and mind you, the appointments it's based on time. But what we would suggest is that we sign those 3 spots for small vehicles only, because again, we allow trucks to park in a 6-meter parking spot backing onto an access aisle, and it would be easier for a small vehicle along there. Anyways, that was one aspect. One of the items that, and I apologize for maybe taking a little longer, but it was quite a lengthy report, and there were some areas of concern that needed to be addressed. And for example, you heard we had done the D4 study as due to the location of the old landfill in the Brandale Square, and again, that was a substantial cost, but again, it was properly requested. And I knew what the answer was before we paid for it, and I got what we basically paid for, having done them before. And having that is a positive feature, and I have no objection to having that. The Brandale Square, in the staff report, they talk about the floodproofing and flood hazards, and what's not mentioned is the fact that in the CPP, there is a section that allows these commercial properties to wet floodproof below the regulatory flood elevation. And that's been a common practice in Huntsville since, I believe, about 1990 or so, when the Boston Pizza building went up. So looking at the conditions, again, we have a number of 6 items. Quite frankly, I don't think that we need the number 6 or the number 4. Number 5 should be changed to say 6 meters. We don't need number 6, in my opinion, because the primary use of the property is commercial. It's not a multiple dwelling. And if it were the principal use as the multiple dwelling, then I understand full well staff's intention to look at density based on those standards. We would respectfully ask that the application be approved with the following changes to the conditions. Number 1, the building design, which includes flood proofing and shows the elevations of doors, windows, or other openings in relation to the regulatory flood elevation. Because I think we are above it, but we do have to put a venting underneath the slab, so it will rise, probably be higher, but again, the option is there for us to wet floodproof. It's currently there for us under the CPP and the old zoning bylaw. Condition 2, agreed. That's going to ensure that no potential methane gets into the building and has a negative impact. Number 3, not disagreeing with the statement in full, but I think it should be clarified to say that the geotechnical investigation of the fill material and subsurface materials with regards to soil bearing capacity be provided. My client was just a little bit concerned having just to the satisfaction of the town and not knowing what the end result was. Lastly, you know, we have an existing parking lot that's been a parking lot for many years, and now you're asking for a stormwater management report on an existing lot. If I were to pave that lot tomorrow, there would be significant runoff, which again, hard surface, which pretty much is there now. We're not going to see a lot of increase in flow based on existing pre and post, but we will definitely have an engineer provide a letter to that effect. But again, we had to do the important study, the D4, that ran about $5 grand to spend $8,000 on a stormwater management. It's one thing to spend a couple thousand to get a letter and a small diagram to show how you're dealing with the runoff is another. The application, I think, is going to, you know, improve upon the street. We heard Cripple Creek's doing some improvements. My client has already spoken with Jamie over at Sutton. I've spoken with Trevor. They didn't have any issues. There's no windows on that wall adjacent. We think it will really frame the perimeter, and you know, we've got other stuff coming with the potential move of Freshco that we're going to have to keep an eye on that area, and let's not see it turn into a food desert. We're going to keep the uses high in that area, and there's, you know, potential for that. And so I would respectfully ask council to approve our application as stated, with the conditions that we've requested. And I think Edward wanted to have just a couple words.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Edward?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed Seagram here, and thank you for considering this. Just a quick comment, and that is that when you run the numbers in this from a business standpoint, you know, we are providing for rental units, which the town has repeatedly, you know, said they need. You know, we also have been contacted, you know, for example, by certain restaurants and things that want to bring year-round staff in, and they have they can't hire staff now because, and so the people that would live in there presumably would work, you know, and walk to their work on a year-round basis. The only issue is with interest rates being so high, and we already did this D4 study, and you know, we would just ask that if we can if this is approved, we're trying to keep our costs down, because when you run the numbers on it, it's sort of barely viable, and in fact, we have to get the cost down more to make it viable. So with carry itself, I don't want to be blind, take money from my everyday job to fund this, you know, I'd like to try to have it somehow be, you know, viable from day one. And even then, we've owned this land for 30 years, so the land, we're not even factoring in the land as an opportunity cost. The families own it for that long. It's still borderline viable, where somebody else would have had to buy that land, and it wouldn't be viable. So the end result is we want, you know, to provide this housing, and it would help us too, because, for example, at the Moose Delaney's, we own that plaza, and that could, for example, provide their staff, for example, a place to live. So anyway, it's, I think, a win-win, and would really appreciate if the town could work with us on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for all of the comments. And the other is that it's a mixed development, and we are really encouraging more mixed development, and certainly in the area that you're proposing. So kudos to you for bringing this forward. I am going to ask council questions. Deputy Mayor Armour, I'm starting with you.
Thank you, Chair Alcock. Thanks, everybody, for the information on this. And John, thanks for your input on those requirements. My question is, it has to do with the snow load and with the parking. I'm just wondering why you wouldn't look at buying some parking in lieu so you have a place to store snow in the wintertime for that area, because it looks like the lot's completely full.
Correct. You are right. I mean, we've tried to allocate, but this just goes, I think this is a good example to show you that even though you can zone lands all you want, when it comes time to actually build upon that land, what you want and what you get are two different things. You wanted 80% coverage. You wanted buildings covering, the only way you can get that is go down 3 levels of parking. So, I mean, we could look at that, but again, when you ask us to provide parking, now we're providing it. If you were to suggest that, you know, you would be satisfied with 8 parking spots, and could you use the one to do some additional landscaping or something? I think you'd consider that, yeah?
We could also remove, we've had to do that before, remove snow from the Mustahinis,
Yeah.
physically remove it is another solution.
But I mean, those are options, but we're trying to, it's sort of finding the balance between meeting the bylaw as best as you can, because really, like I said, when I came in, I was just looking for an exception on a minor variance on a rear yard setback. It was already zoned for the use.
And the other issue, if we reduce, we have to have the size of the building with the 4 units. When you run the math on it, you can't have 3 units, for example, like that. You need the 4 units plus the commercial, and we need that size to make the numbers work. If you have too much parking and too small a building, then it's just not viable.
Can I just add one more thing? And it is because of the design of this, and this will come up, which will be beneficial for future ones. These small town lots, the reason it's at the back, it's the only place that it'll fit. Because if you had to provide a 23-foot wide and then a building, you've already taken up 3/4 of the lot, and you haven't even got your parking done yet. So it's a compact design, 1,400 square feet, 4 units, got a happy tenant that's going to be providing out of their new building. And like I said, all these requirements with the D4 and stuff, that's not onerous. That's just smart.
You good? I also think it's an interesting test run when you go back to the Ryerson study. I remember when you were there, and you know, this is an area that we are really encouraging change, and so I think some of the points you've raised, John, are we're also testing our new CPP, right? So your comments, I'm sure. Kelsey, I think, had her hand up. Maybe you were going to provide a little bit of a response. So I just want to say it's appreciated, though.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify that if this were to be a minor variance, it would still have required the same reliefs. They were in the previous zoning bylaw, except for the density one, which was in our official plan. And when we do a minor variance, we require looking at meeting the intent of the official plan. And then it would have required a site plan. So instead of those 2 processes now combined into one. So I just wanted to clarify that. And there was something else I was going to mention. Yeah, so the buffer requirement was also in our previous zoning bylaw. And the spaces, we agreed this is totally a minor deviation. We just were trying to be friendly and seeing that it was a bit lower, that we just wanted to capture it just in case building came to us later and said, hey, these spots are too small. At least we've covered ourselves. So we didn't have an issue with the smaller spaces, just that one spot was smaller or harder to access. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, John, what you were saying, though, my understanding is that you were almost saying a couple of them were redundant, or it's like they're not necessary.
It's a conflicting clause, and it comes out of section. No, it's just my eyes. 212.4.
212.4.
Section 2.12.4, it says, in all commercial precincts. And then it says, A, with the exception of lands within the CBD, all portions of the front yard and exterior side yard must be landscaped. All with the exception of lands within CBD. It does have a table that sets out a 1 meter buffer around the parking lot and a 3 meter buffer at the street. However, when you get into the parking requirements under 319 something, 319.
Okay.
When you get into that, there is a section that also says,
May I suggest that, I'm going to ask other counselors if they, while you're doing that, John.
No problem.
And because you're scrolling, and I think there are a couple of other questions, and we can come back to that. Councillor Renwick.
Thank you, Your Worship. More of a question or a comment. In the initial package that we received, there were no drawings in the actual, there was the floor plan of the layout of the parking lot and the building. And then I saw these other drawings here, which I'm a visual person. I'm grateful to see them. My question is, from a building orientation, the front of the building is facing the parking lot area. The side portion that I guess is facing the east side is just like a flat wall. Is there any proposed windows or any kind of ornamentation on that? Because it's going to look, every other building is facing east on Chafee.
So the facade is facing Chafee. So they've got the building face with the covered porch on the front. So that's what you're going to see from Chafee Street. From the back, from the Brendale parking lot, you will see the indent in the building with the stairs within that indent. The idea was to keep the residential and the commercial separate, so we've put a walkway around the place. The sides do not have windows. They're adjacent, one's adjacent a building, the other one's adjacent to where they're parking Cripple Creek now. But there were building code issues related to distance separation that limited window, I believe.
Sorry, just to follow up then, and John, if I may, looking at those drawings, so you're saying that the orientation of the building is actually facing, the front of the building is facing Chafee Street?
Yes, and it's tucked back at the lot, so what you see, maybe if Kelsey...
There is, I noticed the overhang. Okay, that was not made.
It would be helpful if we could see that picture. That'd be great.
Yeah.
So the one, so down the bottom right is what you would see.
From Chafee.
From Chafee Street.
There we
The
go.
one above it is from the parking lot of Brendale Square. And
Okay, so you're good? All right, and
the one clause was on 3.2.10.
you found it?
No parking area or associated driveway of a non-residential use or multiple dwelling shall be located within 3 meters of any lot line of an urban residential shoreline, urban residential, community residential precinct. And then it goes on to say, driveways and parking areas may abut in the urban residential medium, mixed use, and commercial precincts. So I say if the parking can abut each other, then why would I be required to provide a 1 meter buffer for it?
So, and that was number?
3.2.10. Oh, sorry,
No, that was, sorry. in
number
our-
3, yes.
Number 3, and you're saying that should just be deleted, right?
Or there's a conflict,
There's
is
a
what I'm
conflict,
saying.
okay. And
Maybe
Kelsey,
not deleted.
Kelsey would like to respond.
Thank you for your
That's
comments,
where-
John. Yeah, we're very aware of that the CPP is new and there might be things that aren't perfect, but I think as of right now, there's a rule in the CPP that if there's more restrictive rules about a provision, the stricter rule overrides the less strict rule. So we were just being cautious in this approach and making sure we had all our I's dotted and T's crossed in covering the reliefs.
Okay, that's very helpful. And what I'm hearing is, John, that staff are recommending approval. And most of the conditions are not onerous. They're pretty clear. And I wrote down some of with reference to your condition of the building design, which it's not entirely different from what they're recommending on that, I don't think. Where it was building which includes flood proofing and shows the minimum elevation of doors. That seemed to be.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Condition 1, the issue there was that are above the regulatory flood elevation, because you are allowed to be below the regulatory
Right,
flood
okay.
elevation if you wet flood proof.
Okay.
And that's in your CPP
So
under,
we're just editing that one a tiny bit.
yeah, so
Okay.
that was, that's already permitted in your CPP under
Okay.
section 3, 4, 13, 8. And right there, the Muskoka
In
River,
relation.
the little subtitle 3, lands where commercial uses are permitted and proposed to develop with either new or existing building shall be permitted to be constructed below the regulatory flood elevation, subject to approved wet floodproofing techniques.
Okay, Kelsey, and I think your words, John, were in relation to the regulatory. And that would that satisfy you, Kelsey, that in relation to?
Apologies. Yeah, so I'll let maybe Kirsten, Director Maxwell, or Manager Clark weigh in if I'm incorrect. But I believe our OP policies are more restrictive, and we also have to look at that. And it recommends that Brendel Square properties are not constructed below the regulatory flood elevation.
So
the openings and such. So.
And I have no doubt that that might be the case. My guess is, and I will look to Director Maxwell or Manager Clark, but in the area of Brendel Square, we, as was alluded to, there will be a number of developments coming forward. So this is, to me, it's sort of a precursor, saying we might want to look at our overall policy to kind of make it less it's still really critical. I know, I'm not denying that. But we sort of figure out where we need to keep our strong language and maybe be more flexible. And because I think it's a special area. And anyway, why am I saying anything? Because Manager Clark is wanting to jump in. Sorry.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So the policies that we're discussing do permit development in Brendel Square, but what we're suggesting and what policies suggest is that the development needs to be appropriately flood-proofed. So the distinction that I believe John is suggesting is that the condition as worded requires flood-proofing and that the minimum the basically doors and windows be above the flood elevation. And in my opinion, that is an appropriate compromise, flexibility, as you say, because it does allow development within the floodplain, but it requires an appropriate level of flood-proofing and an appropriate management of risk. We wouldn't want to see too much development happening there if there are a bunch of windows and doors that are below the flood elevation. So that's what I was...
Okay, so that's the opinion, and I'm wondering, I feel like we're talking way too much detail for this table, so I hate that, and Kirsten is about to weigh in and save it all. Shut her down.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
no
Chair
pressure
Alka.
at all, none.
What I was thinking we could suggest is that John and the applicant could meet with staff and go through and determine where there might be some flexibility and where there isn't. And then we could either come back to the next Planning Council meeting for the final approval, or the approval could be done today with the condition that we would have those discussions and determine whether or not there is any ability for anything to be changed. I am very, I recognize that John has pointed out all sorts of things that might be conflicting and things that are a bit different, and we are working through a new bylaw, and we're happy to discuss those, perhaps in more detail in, site-specific circumstances.
I appreciate that comment, and certainly that would be my preference, that we approve today conditional. I'm sure somebody's going to come up with the right wording, but I think that's an excellent offer, and you can trust that.
We have no objection to having it approved today. We have the word, I mean, wet floodproofing is
right.
Having your windows below. You wouldn't have it any other way if it were not wet floodproofing. So that's the purpose of wet floodproofing, is to allow those openings below.
Okay, perfect.
But we will work with staff for
And-
helping us out, and it'll
And-
be really interesting to see how the building/site plan part of this sort of
Totally.
gets to fruition, because this
Totally.
will be a good test of the CPP, so
No.
looking forward to it, and,
That's,
yeah.
you see, that's exactly it. It's kind of sorry, Edward, but it's a bit of a test case moving forward with exactly the kind of development, mixed development in this area. So you're kind of the test, sorry. And Councillor Fitzgerald is about to toss something at me because he's been waving. You don't. But Deputy Mayor, Deputy Mayor again has a question.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, to John, you mentioned the stormwater management too. So how do you see us mediating that? What would you like to see done for that?
It'd be an engineer's letter, basically, showing how drainage. Lot for 30 years, there's not going to be a lot of intensity. There's a storm drain on Chafee Street that the district, in their comments, has said we can drain into. I can't see there being a giant pond required on a 1400s. That's why I'm sort of, and you remember that with some of the site plan stuff with Bill 23, that doesn't apply to Huntsville because of the CPP, so we have to sort of try and balance the fairness out ourselves, I guess, in determining when studies are required, et cetera.
Okay, that's good. Did you have a follow-up?
Just
Yes.
that would be part of the conversation, the stormwater management aspect too.
And Kelsey wanted to respond to that as well.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that that was an operations requirement, so they'd see what was fit and the flexibility there, as well as the photometric plan. And this property would have required a site plan, regardless of
Right.
Bill 23, because it's a commercial property. So
Right.
it still would have gone through these regulations.
But that could be captured as part of this discussion. Okay. Am I missing anybody? No. We need, sorry, but we need 5 minutes to work out the wording of the Yes, John?
I hate to correct you, but I didn't hear you ask if there was any public that had any questions.
This is not a public meeting.
Even though we're on a level 3. Interesting.
I know.
Thank you.
New CPP. I know.
Thank you.
It is interesting, but we do need 5 minutes to work out Okay, thank you, everybody, for your patience on that. That was longer than 5 minutes, I'm sure. But we do have a proposed amendment that our clerk is going to put on the screen. I only need to read the mover and second, or I should read the whole amendment, or? I've already read it, so. Okay, I need a mover and a seconder. I thought you'd, okay, I have a mover, Councillor, I feel like this is an auction. I have a mover, Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Deputy Mayor Armour. How's that? And can everybody read it, or should I make note of some of the changes that are in red? So at number 4, we are now saying a photometric plan, and we've deleted provided to the satisfaction of the town. And 5, a stormwater management report, and we have deleted provided to the satisfaction of the town. All right. And then we've added all conditions may be fulfilled through the submission of the above or alternative measures to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. And that's it. Look at that. Are there any questions or comments with respect to those changes? Seeing none, I will call the question on the proposed amendment. All right, that passes unanimous. And I should note that Councillor Clark is sitting back because this is the item that he has declared a conflict. So that passed unanimously. And I now will call the question on the original motion as amended. All those in favor? And that carries. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for that. That was way more than, and thank you, Kelsey, for a great report, great discussion, and thank you for your input, gentlemen. All right, moving to our last item, which is, we've got Madeline joining us again with CPP 07 2023 HT Buckman 190 Rachel's Lane. And I don't have, this is the one? It's another long one. It has, I think that's it. Sorry about this. We're just, if I go to my, it's come up on my screen. Is there a difference? Yeah. Okay. I wonder if I should read this. This is, would people like me to read this or would like me to waive it? Waive the reading. It's a long one. Waive it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Renwick. It's a long one. It has been moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Councillor Clark. And this is, be it resolved that Planning Council provisionally approve a portion of Community Planning Permit Application CPP 07 2023 HT, the purpose and effect of which is to recognize an existing 56 meter squared private cabin and 58 meter squared attached deck and provide relief from subsection 4.3.4 of the Community Planning Permit Bylaw 2022-97. 2, and I won't read the rest. It is all the same. The clerk has it on the screen, and it's exactly as it was in our published agenda. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Madeline.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 190 Rachel's Lane. The lot is designated waterfront in Huntsville's official plan and is under the waterfront residential 120 meters with exception 1029 precinct in the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. An application has been submitted to permit the construction of a boat launch and recognize the existing structures on the lot. A community planning permit is required to recognize an existing 56 square meter private cabin and 58 square meter attached deck, recognize a 28 meter front yard setback for the existing 160 square meter dwelling, recognize a 28.3 meter front yard setback for an existing 10 square meter gazebo, recognize a 23.9 meter front yard setback for the existing attached 86 square meter unenclosed deck, and recognize a 29.5 front yard setback for an existing attached 26 square meter unenclosed deck. The application also proposes to permit an increase in the maximum permitted shoreline amenity area width from 23.5 meters to 27.4 meters for the construction of a boat launch and a 3.9 meter wide path providing access to it. The subject lands are within the waterfront residential 120 meter precinct. In addition to the precinct, the lands are also within the Natural Constraint 1 and 2 overlay, which have identified sloping of various degrees, type 1 fish habitat, and wetland. To permit the proposed boat launch, planning relief is required in order to increase the shoreline amenity area width. Previous approvals were granted for the existing structures through Site Plan Agreement Application SPA 39, 2003, shown on the left. However, it appears that the construction of the dwelling and accessory structures was not undertaken in accordance with the approved site plan. They encroached into the 30-meter required front yard setback and changed in orientation and size. It was also determined that decks and other accessory structures were not shown on the plans, and this was identified by the current site plan on the right and through Site Plan Agreement Amendment Application SPA 130, 2020, and the applicants were made aware that relief would be required in order to go forward. Variations to the community planning permit bylaw are addressed and evaluated against 5 criteria as mentioned in the report. Recognizing the existing structures on the property is appropriate to record their orientation, size, and location. However, the proposed boat launch does not appear to be appropriate for the lands, as it would be increasing the shoreline amenity area width and removing vegetation within the shoreline buffer. The curved nature of the shoreline creates a unique property characteristic wherein shoreline amenity areas would be viewed from multiple angles from the lake. The existing structures within the shoreline buffer currently exceed the maximum permitted width of 15 meters and are approximately 23.5 meters. The proposal includes portions of decking from various platforms to be removed. However, with the proposed boat launch, the shoreline amenity area would continue to exceed the allowable width at 27.4 meters. This width does not include the additional deck along the east shoreline, which is not shown on the site plan drawing. And for reference, that deck is just shown on the image on the screen, circled in red. In the planning justification report submitted by the agent, it mentions that future disturbance of fish habitat is unlikely as no new development is proposed on the subject lands except for the boat launch. The boat launch location and construction practices have been reviewed by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, which indicated that no negative impacts to fish or fish habitat are anticipated, provided the guidelines in the letter are followed. However, the boat launch is also proposed in proximity to an area identified as wetland. No wetland delineation or assessment was submitted to determine the exact location of the wetland or the proposed effects the boat launch may have. A technical report is required where development is within 30 meters of a wetland. Vegetation removal is considered development as per section 1.2.12 in the Community Planning Permit Bylaw. The subject lands are located in an area designated waterfront in the Huntsville Official Plan, and in this instance, the shoreline is primarily maintained in a natural state with dense vegetation. However, the boat launch would be removing a 60 square meter portion of vegetation from the shoreline buffer. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. 10 letters of objection were received from neighboring property owners, which all similarly brought forward concerns in respect to the short-term rental use on the property, increased boat traffic on the lake, and concerns to sensitive environmental features. These letters were included in the report package. The Fox Lake Association also provided an additional letter to express similar concerns to those brought forward by neighboring property owners, and this letter was also included in the report package. The Town of Huntsville's short-term rental accommodation licensing coordinator was consulted, and it's been confirmed that the owners are renting in accordance with their improved short-term rental license. District of Muskoka staff provided comments that recommend the application be deferred until such time that an environmental impact study is submitted that confirms there will be no negative impacts on natural features or their ecological functions. Staff have minor adjustments to the wording of the recommendation. In the report. So on the slide is the recommendation shown how it's found within the report package. And staff are suggesting that the wording of condition 1 under the provisional approval be changed to the deck located along the east shoreline being removed. And additionally, that condition 2 of the approval be changed to building permits being obtained for the deck attached to the private cabin, the deck attached to the dwelling, and the dock. And a motion has been prepared to make these adjustments. And through staff's review and analysis, the application would not appear to meet the applicable criteria for approval under the CPP bylaw, nor be consistent with the provincial policy statement. And as such, staff are recommending that only a portion of the reliefs requested be approved, subject to the conditions as mentioned. Council could approve the community planning permit application, however, that's not recommended. A request to postpone the application can be expected by the applicants as they wish to revise the proposal and consider district and town comments to provide an environmental impact assessment. And a motion has been prepared should council wish to consider this. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madeline. Is the applicant or their representative,
They should be virtual.
they're virtual, okay. I'm looking to our virtual table.
Yes, Mayor Alcock, they are virtual, and I'll bring them into the meeting.
Thank you, Manuel.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of council. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I wasn't sure. And I wasn't aware everybody would be there in person. I feel like I'm missing out now. So maybe next time you'll get to enjoy it in person.
Okay, thanks, Graham.
So good afternoon. My name is Graham Huizinga, land use planner with Tulloch Engineering in Huntsville, Ontario, 80 Main Street West, P1H1W9. Yeah, I'd like to start off by thanking Madeline and also Kelsey to some extent for working on this file. It's kind of been in the queue for quite some time now. It's got a bit of a storied history to it, which I'll briefly touch on just for council's illumination. This application initially started, I want to say 3 years ago as a site plan amendment application. I think Madeline had the original site plan agreement for the property that was prepared by a prior owner up on the screen at one point. And there wasn't a whole lot of information or detail provided on that site plan agreement. At the time, it was accepted and approved, and it basically just indicated that there'd be a dwelling constructed on the property, and certain areas would be set aside for shoreline amenity, with really no further detail provided as to whether structures or buildings or things like that would be located within those areas. So the property was purchased by my clients, Corey Rosenfield and Josephine Buckman, who I believe are also attending virtually and may wish to speak following me. And it was, the property was acquired by them under the assumption that, the property had been developed in accordance with the approved site plan agreement that was registered on title. Unfortunately, through this process, it's been determined that was not the case, and there's several instances of non-complying structures and buildings that predate my client's ownership of the property that are on the subject lands, and that's generally what you see in the variances requested. The cabin, the gazebo, the deck attached to the dwelling, and even a small portion of the dwelling itself. Things like that were all predating my client's ownership of the property. So as an aside, this is something that's being dealt with by them through their title insurance, as these things were not disclosed as being not in compliance or not built in conformity with the site plan agreement that was registered on title. So a part of this is to rectify that and recognize these existing buildings and structures, the majority of which predate my client's ownership of the property. So the site plan amendment application that we initially filed was basically just requesting to amend the site plan agreement on title to add this shoreline access boat launch. And at that time, it was recommended by staff that the DFO be contacted, as they would be the Ministry of Jurisdiction of boat traffic and boat launches. And we received a letter of advice, which I believe council has been circulated, indicating construction best practices and mitigation measures to ensure that fish habitat or fish themselves would not be harmed in the creation of this boat launch. Now, I should note that at the time, the boat launch was actually proposed within the identified wetland area on the property, and DFO reviewed it on that basis. We've since moved the boat launch a little bit to the southeast to be outside of the identified wetland area. So, and if anything, it's an improvement on what was initially proposed and commented on by the DFO. Having said that, I understand that the town and district would be considering the requirement for an EIS to support the location of the boat launch in proximity to this wetland feature. I'm not an ecologist myself, but having read, many ecological assessments of a similar nature, I would anticipate that the findings of that report would contain similar mitigation measures to the ones listed in the DFO letter of advice. Having said that, if it's council's will to require this EIS in addition to the DFO letter of advice, we'd be happy to undertake that if it means approval for this boat launch. The other thing, of course, is that there's been some concern received from other residents on Fox Lake and nearby residents, and their concerns, as Madeline mentioned, tend to focus on three main items, being the use of the property as a short-term rental, the use of the lake itself, and how the lake is used by persons who are making use of the short-term rental, and then of course concerns with the environmental aspect of the proximity of the property to this wetland feature. So the first two, while they're well taken and well noted by the property owner, they don't really have a land use bearing on the application as it is in front of council today. But we did discuss, the comments that were received, and the property owner has indicated that they're definitely happy to do things like chain off this boat launch and have, access to it only available by the property owner or, persons they entrust with a key to a padlock kind of thing, to restrict access to the boat launch so that it, would not be taken advantage of or used by persons without their knowledge or consent. And also to make sure that prospective renters at this property are made well aware of, boating etiquette rules and things like that, and note that the lake is a smaller lake, and that if, they're wanting to find a water body to take larger watercraft on, then this lake might not be an appropriate one, and make some recommendations on where they can put in on some of the larger lakes in the area. And of course, the third item being the environmental aspect of that, which has been touched on through the DFO letter of advice, and if council wills it, that will also be touched on through an ecological assessment. Now, the other thing that Madeline mentioned is that the concern that staff has is with increasing the shoreline amenity area width beyond what's currently there. Now, we had a brief conversation, Madeline and I, yesterday about this. And following that conversation, I did discuss this concern with the property owner. And as a result of that discussion, we'd like to request a deferral of this application so that we can come back to council with a proposal that looks at removing maybe some of these landscape elements that would be within 50 feet of the shoreline in order to kind of negate the proposed boat launch in terms of its area or its shoreline amenity area width. And we're thinking of doing that by way of removing or greatly limiting the fire pit area and allowing that area to renaturalize in its stead. And as a result, the idea would be that there'd be no net change in the shoreline amenity area width. So all that, we're here at the meeting today, of course, and we're happy to take discussion from council and members of the public into consideration, but we'd like to request a deferral to, perhaps amend the application to one that both the applicant and staff can be amenable to. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for that, Graham. And you said the applicant would like to speak, or no?
They're here. Your
They're here
worship,
for questions.
Yes, I'm not sure if they have
Okay.
anything prepared, but they are here.
Okay. All right. With that, then, I will ask council if you have any questions regarding this application. Yes, Councillor Morrison, or was that? Yeah. Okay.
You just anticipated that I might want to
That's-
talk.
Just because.
Yeah, that's must be
That's-
something.
That's true.
I guess a couple of quick comments. And more to Madeline. If we were under the 15 meters, you mentioned in the report it'd be a 15-meter maximum amenity development. If they were under the 15 meters, would this boat launch be allowed? Like, is it just because it's over? Is that the main reason for from a planning perspective?
Yes, thank you. Through Chair Alcock. So there's kind of two things that we've been considering. So one is the amenity area. So yes, they're already over and they would be exceeding that. So if they were within that width, it would likely be more supported. But the second aspect to that is how close they are to the wetland. So if an environmental assessment does come back saying that a boat launch would negatively impact the environmental features close by, then staff are still under the same opinion.
Yep, follow up.
And I'll follow up to that. I do, from the aerial photos provided, it does look like an environmentally sensitive area, so regardless, it might not be appropriate. I just wondered if we were bound by the minimum amounts. And I guess the other question is, even though this owner wasn't the one that constructed the decks and the gazebo, it sounds like their lawyer didn't do a proper title search at the time, because they're going through title insurance, which means that it wasn't discovered at the time of closing. So maybe that's something that'll be dealt with through title insurance, but as a community or municipality, would we be doing inspections on these, and would there be penalties for not getting a proper building permit, even though it was a previous owner that did it?
So in relation to that, inspections would only be done if they did submit the building permits. So that's why that condition was included, and that would be a condition of the CPP permit, would be that they did go to building afterwards, because they wouldn't be constructing anything new. But in order to remedy those structures already there, they do need permits and inspections. And upon those inspections, if things aren't done properly, they would have to fix them.
Thank you for that. I made an error. In fact, we actually have a deputation request, and so from a member of the Fox Lake Association. So I am going to call that member forward now. My apologies, Alex. It's not on. Am I speaking in script? No. Okay. Welcome, and I apologize for that. You're on. You're on.
Your Worship, Madam Chair, councillors, staff, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Alex Ewell, and I'm the president of the Fox Lake Association. And I'm happy that there are two members of the Fox Lake Association executive here with me today. The association has been representing the Fox Lake community for more than 30 years. We are supporting the staff's recommendation to deny the request for the boat launch, not the other parts of the application. We are an association of 69 members, which represents more than 50% of the property owners on the lake. In 2021, we did a survey of property owners. We got over 50 responses back, which you will appreciate, a huge response rate in this day and age. 64% of respondents indicated that boat traffic and issues related to boats, boat safety and damage from boats, and powered boat conflict is their priority issue on the lake. We have, to understand these issues, you have to understand a little bit about the characteristics of Fox Lake. Very small lake. You saw a portion of it on the picture that Madeline showed. It's sort of a weird hourglass shape with a whole bunch of little bays and peninsulas, 3 islands, narrow water bodies, a huge underground sandbar, sensitive areas at the river mouths. So it's almost impossible to drive a boat on this lake powerboat, for more than 2 minutes without being very close to a shoreline. So we have problems with shoreline erosion, damage to nesting areas, wildlife, fisheries, swimmers. It's a huge problem. It's exacerbated because of the number of boats, which arises from the fact that the lake was developed very early, before there was a lot of limits on development size. On the east side of the lake, the entire lake side, and on the west side, the southern portion, the lots are only 100 feet. Some of them are only 50 feet wide that have buildings on them, cottages and full-time residents. So you can imagine with that density of population, the number of boats that we already have. So the concern of the association and its membership is that a boat launch on a property that's used for short-term rentals, and it's a large property, so there's usually 2 or 3 different groups of people there at any given time. The number of boats coming into the lake could increase dramatically, which would exacerbate all of the problems we already have. It's a landlocked lake, which means there's dams on the rivers on both ends, so we don't have boats from outside the area coming into the lake, which has been fabulous because it means we've been able to this point to not have any invasive species. But if you have a boat launch that's bringing in boats from outside the area with short-term renters, that turnover would increase the risk of invasive species dramatically. Also, because it's landlocked, we don't have OPP on the lake, which is really nice if you're out canoeing, without a life preserver. But it's not great for issues that we have around boating and boater safety. We have, as an association, we have a lake steward, and over the years we've done a large education campaign with our residents around boating safety, boating etiquette, and the hazardous areas, the no-wake zones on the lake. And we've worked with the 2 summer camps on the lake, especially Camp Winnebago, which has a huge summer program, many boats, around where the boating lanes are, so that they would only take their ski boats and wake boats in a certain pathway on the lake so that everybody else in the lake can keep out of the way. And they only drive them out certain times of the day, so that reduces the cottager resident camp conflict. Again, with a lot of with people who are short-term renters coming onto the lake who aren't aware of the lake and the lake features and those kinds of things that we have collectively agreed to informally amongst the campers and the residents, we are really afraid that the amount of boater conflict and boater-swimmer conflict and motorized and unmotorized watercraft conflict will increase. We're also very concerned about the damage to the area. You saw again, it's a very sensitive area. It's on this little peninsula, very close to a little island, 2 little bays, the protected water area, the sandbar and the river mouth. So again, even though I did read the fisheries report about mitigation measures for the construction of a launch, the fact that it wouldn't be just put your boat in the spring and bring it out in the fall, but rather a number of boats and motors and trucks and trailers going in and out every time there's a changeover of renter. And I know that's not a given, that's a potential risk. It would be impossible to assume that that kind of traffic in and out of the lake wouldn't be damaging to the fish habitat, the wildlife, and just pollution, the water quality itself. I know that people do want to bring boats into the lake. The Camp Winnebago does allow owners to come in for a small fee. They make their boat ramp available to residents on the lake for 2 weeks in the spring and 2 weeks in the fall. So if the owners wanted to bring their own boat in, they can do that as every other owner does. So we understand that you could see from the pictures that where the boat launch is being prepared is the only piece of undisturbed vegetation on that entire property. It's pretty denuded. So by putting in a roadway and a boat launch there, that sensitive area would, and that riparian zone in that shoreline would be damaged further. So we are concerned very much about water quality, wildlife, conservation, the environment there, as well as the number of boats on the lake. Even though it could legally be allowed if the shoreline was restored, as I heard earlier in your discussion, just because something is in the official plan doesn't mean that you have to follow that. You have the ability to make choices based on what's good for the community, and we have a very strong community on a very small lake of families that have been there for years. My family's been on that lake since 1876. And my grandparents had a cottage there since 1947. It's a very strong community. It's very family-oriented. Conservation, wildlife, all those kinds of things are what brings us there and keeps us there. And we want to make sure that that environment is protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation, Alex. Much appreciated. And apparently, where's Bob? The owners, Corey and Josephine, are on the line, online, and in fact, I think would like to say something. So they had the opportunity earlier, but I somehow missed it. So can we bring them? Yep. Where's Bob? I know he is. Great pictures.
Hello?
Hello.
Hey. Yeah, sorry, I had my hand raised and I was messaging in the chat, but I must have been missed, so.
Okay, no worries. You're here with us now, and we can hear you, so that's great.
Great. I guess it wasn't the traditional order to have had the public speak after or before me, so I'll try not to bias my comments too much, as I do have something prepared anyways. Graham did a great job of giving a bit of background, and also want to echo thank you to Madeline and Kelsey for working on this file. There's been a lot of back and forth for close to 3 years now to try and meet the requirements of the township in doing this in a safe and proper manner. But in terms of background, this, as Graham mentioned, we bought the property in late 2019. My wife and I, we've got a young family. We're in our 30s. We definitely could not afford to have a property of this kind without making it a part-time short-term rental. With that being said, a lot of the complaints referenced that this is constantly a rental, and that's not true. We go up there a lot of the time ourselves. We enjoy going up there with friends and family, and it's our goal over time to make this a property that we can use exclusively for ourselves, but we're thankful for the short-term rental bylaws that are in place, and we've followed them since the very beginning to make sure we were running things properly. But originally we submitted a site plan amendment and a building permit to put a boat launch, and that was it. And from the planning department, we were actually told this is no problem and they're expecting to be able to prove it. And at the 23rd hour, they discovered that the previous owner had put in place a number of structures and amenities that were not within bylaw. And yes, there was the comment about title insurance, but what isn't known is the previous owner had permits open a day before we closed on the property. And they had the building department come out and close the permit specifically on the bunkie, which is located too close to the shoreline. So even though we've been going through our title insurance, there's been a bit of a misstep by the planning department to close those permits once the bunkie was already in place. So it wasn't my lawyers that missed anything. We had all closed permits on the structures. There was a slip up possibly in a few different areas. A conversation probably for another day, but I wanted to address where we did our due diligence as we should have, and it seems there were some things missed by other parties, and now we're left in this position where it was originally a minor variance and now a CPP process to get things rectified, which we would really like to do. The challenge is we're now in this position where we've spent a lot of money on the environmental assessment and the Ministry of Fisheries study, and we spent a lot of money going back and forth to figure out how we can do this in the most proper fashion. And we're now in a position where it's being suggested by the planning department that we can't have the boat ramp that we originally applied for, and we have to remove a bunch of structures. And it's almost to our benefit to just continue to leave it as is, and otherwise it's almost a net negative for us, where I feel like we didn't do anything wrong and all of a sudden we're losing structures and we're not getting what we originally asked for. So it's become a very frustrating process. That's kind of my vent / background information, but to address the actual concerns, we're not looking to we're not creating a public boat launch here. My wife and I and my in-laws came up for the weekend for a couple weeks over the July long weekend in early July last year. We can't afford our own boat. So we wanted to rent a boat or a jet ski for a couple days, and we had no way to get it into the water because right now all the residents use Camp Winnebago's boat launch, and they don't provide access to the residents on the lake in July and August. So we had no way to get our boat rental into the water. There's a couple other cottages that have private boat ramps, but they weren't available that weekend, and we had no way to get our rental onto the water. It's not about creating dozens of more boats going on the water in this whole big disturbance. Though I appreciate that it's being presented that way, it's about my personal use of my property and being able to enjoy the lake to its fullest. And I'm almost being penalized because I can't afford to have a $40,000 boat sitting there all year round. If I want to rent one once or twice during the summer, I have no way to get it on the lake. But with that being said, we're happy to chain it off so others aren't able to use it. We're happy to add to our list, our 100 rules that we already have when our property is used by someone else, add more information and education, just like we do about noise regulations, add information about best boating practices. Right now, Winnebago has multiple huge wake boats on the lake. We're talking about a personal jet ski or a small 12-foot bass fishing boat. We're not talking about introducing major changes to what is already what the existing situation already is on the lake. Either way, I think it's pretty clear that the district has suggested that this is deferred so we can do a more an additional environmental assessment. I think it's probably redundant, but we're happy to go through the process just as we have been to meet all the requirements of the town. I just think it's probably the fairest solution that if we meet all the requirements and we meet the requirements of the bylaw, and here we are coming into this situation, needing to make all these changes to the property that were permitted and closed off, we should be able to put in this 3-meter wide pathway as long as we're not increasing the amenity usage at the end of the day. And I think Madeline's alluded to the fact that that's probably likely. I feel the noise related to boat traffic from people that own their own boats is quite hypocritical and shouldn't really be relevant in the decision-making process here. So with that being said, I appreciate all your time. I know we're only talking about a boat ramp here. I probably spent more on the process than it would cost me to even put the boat ramp in the first place. But yeah, I appreciate your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions or concerns that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Buckman. Will you stay on the line because I'm going to ask council if there are any questions that they might have that might be
Definitely.
directed towards you. Yes, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock, and through you. Yeah, my comment earlier about the title searching is that the lawyer didn't miss stuff necessarily. The lawyer, one of the lawyers obviously picked up that there was a bunkie that had an outstanding permit. And that permit was closed. That's great. What wasn't caught was that there were structures built without permits. So there weren't open permits, there was just no permits. You know, so that's what was missed. And that, it sucks when you buy a property and you find out after the fact. However, that doesn't change the fact that right now, this property doesn't seem to lend itself to having a boat launch on that waterway. There's no right to have a rental boat brought to your property. Like, that's not a thing. While I understand you'd love to have that there, I get it. But if you can't work something out with an existing boat launch and the amenity area on your current lot doesn't allow for a boat launch, then unfortunately, you may not be able to get the boat on there. I think, like, the argument from the Lake Association, while I appreciate and I totally get it, that's not really a planning argument, so we need to speak to the planning side of this. And from the planning side, I think Madeline's presentation clearly shows that it'll be really tough to approve a boathouse on this property, or boat launch on this property. Just my thoughts.
Thank you for that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor Alcock. I just have a few comments. So just in relation to what Councillor Morrison was saying, this property would be a realtor's worst nightmare if you were going to list it today. And so thank you to the owners for their willingness to try to fix a previous owner's mistakes to rectify the outstanding issues. And the owner had mentioned, well, what is the benefit to me to fix the issues? Well, the benefit to the owner is to rectify the issue so that a future sale would not be impeded. And that is the benefit to the current owner. I agree with the neighbors' concerns regarding the boat launch. I'm pleased to see that staff's recommendation is to deny the boat launch at this location. And thirdly, I would have concerns with the boat launch if this wasn't a short-term rental. The fact that it is a short-term rental only reinforces, in my opinion, why the boat launch should be denied at this location and a deferral not granted. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Clark. Are there any other, Madeline.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing through you, Chair Alcock. I just want to say that in recognizing the setbacks of the structures that are there and obtaining the appropriate permits for the structures that haven't been built without one, should the owners ever want to make any other changes on the property, they would have to do that anyway. So you kind of end up at square one all over again. So I do think it is in their best interest to remedy the situation and rectify all of that.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. Are there any other questions or comments with respect to the motion that we have before us? Yes, Councillor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Alcock, and through you. So I just want to be clear, if we go through with the motion, that means we're not granting a deferral. We're going through with the partial recommendation, or partial approval that Madeline's endorsing, right? Okay.
We are,
Okay, great.
because no one has tabled the motion for deferral.
For deferral, okay,
I was
great.
about to say a partial deferral. All right, Natalie. Councillor Schumacher, again. Oh,
Yes,
I was
thank
looking around the table. I was scouring.
No worries.
Okay, Councillor Schumacher.
No, I appreciate all the deputations. I did want to say I realized in the agenda you kind of had skipped a few, so I was happy to hear everybody kind of make their comments. And I agree with mostly what has been said at the table. If we agree to this, this does mean we are not accepting the boat launch, because I'm in favor of not having the boat launch, correct?
Yes, that is exactly. So what we have before us right now is the motion that was, I waived the reading, or council waived the reading, but it is the one that was in your package. That is a provisional approval for a portion of the property, and with the recommendation of denial for the other portion with respect to the boat launch. Okay, is that clear as mud? Uh-oh.
Yes, I put my hand up, thank you, or my thumbs up. Clear as
Okay,
mud.
and you still have
Clear as
your little
mud.
hand, and you still have your little
Yeah,
hand up.
I gotta lower that.
Okay, all right, good. So I'm looking around the table again. I don't see any. That's a really, I sort of wondered about that in the back of my head. Madeline, you had some corrections that
Yes,
you
through
had
you, Chair
noted.
Alcock.
Are they in this motion?
They're in the motion as amended.
Okay, so I haven't read the amendment.
No.
So I need to read the amendment. Boy, I don't know what I'd do without everybody. Oh, my God. Okay, I need a mover and a seconder for this amendment, and it's just putting it, thank you, Deputy Mayor Armour. And I have a thank you, Councillor Cloutier. I have a motion moved by Deputy Mayor Armour, seconded by Councillor Cloutier. Be it resolved that the following condition, 1, final site plan drawings being submitted to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville that include a portion of the deck located along on the east shoreline and an additional note respecting the removal of an additional portion of deck at the peninsula, both requiring revegetation of the disturbed areas once removed, be submitted as follows. 1, the deck located along the east shoreline being removed. And further that the following condition, building permits being obtained for the deck attached to the private cabin and the deck attached to the dwelling be substituted as follows. 1, building permits being obtained for the deck attached to the private cabin, the deck attached to the dwelling, and the dock. Okay, questions or comments with respect to the amendment? None. Oh, Councillor Morrison? No. Is this what you had proposed? Tanya's very nervous. I don't know why. Are you good? Or I'm turning my mic off for a minute. All right, okay, I'm going to lean over to our director for a minute. Okay, we're good. We're good. So, yes, Deputy Mayor Armour, you have a question with regard to the amendment? Might be related.
Just to ensure that we are denying the vote.
That's,
It's still
well,
in the
that's what the
original
clerk,
motion, right?
that's what the
It's
clerk.
still in the original
So
motion?
what this amendment does, if we remember Madeline's presentation, she had these little red boxes that popped up during her presentation that would be in addition to the original motion, or replace certain clauses in the original motion, but nothing to do with the last clause of the original motion, which was to deny. All right? So, now that's clear? You and the clerk on the same page, just saying. All right, I'm calling the question. All those in favor of the amendment? And that carries, and I see your hand, Councillor Schumacher. So I am signing that, and now I am going to call the question on the main motion as amended. All those in favor? And that carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for all of your discussion around this, and thank you for your participation, Alex. Okay, and good work, Madeline. Yeah. Now if I'm going back here. So moving right along, we don't have any previous business, we don't have any new business, And under general information, just a list of staff delegated approvals. I'm assuming we don't have any questions with regard to that. So with that, I do have a motion moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Cloutier. Be it resolved that confirmation bylaw 2023-42 be received, numbered, and read a first, second, and third time. I thought we amended that. Oh, the bylaw's coming, oh, man. Not. And third time and finally passed this 12th day of April 2023. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, there's another. Oh, I forgot. We have another motion moved by Councillor Renwick, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that we do hereby adjourn at 4:12 p.m. All those in favor? And that carries.